Hello there, dear listeners. Welcome back to another episode of our historical journey through time. I'm your host, and today we're going to slow down. We're going to take our time. Because the story we're about to explore together deserves patience, deserves attention, deserves the kind of unhurried contemplation that our medieval ancestors would have given it. Settle in. Perhaps you're listening while wrapped in a warm blanket, or maybe you're taking a slow walk. Wherever you are, I want you to imagine the cold bite of a December wind in the year 1450. Imagine stone walls, thick and ancient, keeping out the winter chill. Imagine the smell of wood smoke, of roasting meat, of spiced wine warming over a fire. Today, we're talking about the 12 days of Christmas. Not the song, well, not just the song, but the actual historical celebration that once defined the heart of winter for medieval Christians across Europe. This wasn't just a holiday. It was a season. A sacred, joyous, mysterious season that began on December 25th and stretched all the way to January 6th. 12 days. 12 precious days when the normal rules of life were suspended. When work ceased. When celebration became a form of prayer. When the boundary between the earthly and the divine seemed somehow thinner. So let's begin. Let's walk through these 12 days together, one by one, slowly, carefully, as if we ourselves are medieval pilgrims moving through this sacred season. Day 1, Christmas Day, December 25th. It's Christmas morning. The first day of Christmas. But you need to understand something right away. This isn't the culmination of the season. For medieval people, this is the beginning. Everything they've done for the past 4 weeks, through the penitential season of Advent, has been leading to this moment. Advent was dark. Quiet. Fasting was required. Purple vestments hung in the churches. It was a time of waiting, of preparation, of longing. And now the waiting is over. The church bells ring out across the frozen landscape. In villages and towns across medieval Europe, people are waking before dawn. They're putting on their best clothes. The ones they've saved all year for this moment. The wealthy don their finest woolens and furs. The poor carefully mend and clean what they have. Everyone, regardless of station, is preparing to attend Mass. The Christmas Mass, oh, the Christmas Massachusetts. In the medieval church, this isn't a simple service. This is theater, mystery, cosmic drama made manifest. Let me paint this picture for you slowly, because it deserves your imagination. You enter the church. It's still dark outside, but inside, candles blaze. Hundreds of them. Thousands, in the great cathedrals. The darkness of Advent has given way to overwhelming light. The purple vestments have been replaced with white and gold. Evergreens, holly, ivy, rosemary, decorate the pillars and altars, their scent mixing with incense. The choir begins to sing. Gregorian chant echoes off stone walls, those ancient melodies that seem to come from another world entirely. Puer natus est nobis. A child is born to us. The words float upward toward vaulted ceilings, toward heaven itself. In many medieval churches, they performed the office of the shepherds, a liturgical drama. Priests, dressed as shepherds, would act out the nativity story right there in the church. Sometimes they brought actual sheep into the sanctuary. Can you imagine? The bleating of real animals, the smell of wool and hay, the sense that this ancient story was happening right now, right here, in this very moment. The Mass continues for hours. Medieval people didn't rush their worship. They luxuriated in it. Multiple Masses were often celebrated on Christmas Day, one at midnight, one at dawn, one during the day. Each had its own character, its own emphasis. The faithful might attend all three. After Mass, the feasting begins. And oh, what feasting! You have to understand, medieval people had been fasting throughout Advent. Meat was often forbidden. Dairy was restricted. Meals were simple, penitential. But now the tables are laden. In noble households, the Christmas feast was spectacular. Roasted swans and peacocks, their feathers carefully replaced after cooking so they appeared alive on the platter. Boar's head, the traditional centerpiece, carried in with ceremony and song. Meat pies filled with spiced beef and venison. Frumenty, a wheat porridge made rich with milk and eggs and spices brought from distant lands, cinnamon, nutmeg, saffron, luxuries that cost fortunes. The wassail bowl is passed. This is a drink made of ale or cider, heated and spiced, with roasted apples floating on top. Ways hail, people say to one another, be healthy, an ancient Anglo-Saxon blessing. They drink deeply, the warm liquid fortifying them against winter's cold. In peasant homes, the fare is simpler but no less cherished. A chicken, perhaps, saved and fattened for this day. Fresh bread made with precious white flour instead of the usual coarse rye. Cheese and butter, forbidden during Advent's fast. Maybe even a small portion of pork from the pig slaughtered earlier in the winter. Families gather around fires. Stories are told. The Christmas story, yes, but also tales of saints and miracles, ghost stories, for Christmas was traditionally a time for ghost stories in medieval England. The boundary between worlds was thin, remember. Strange things could happen on these holy nights. The Yule log burns in the hearth. This isn't just any log. It's been carefully selected, usually from oak or ash, large enough to burn throughout the 12 days. In some traditions, a piece of last year's Yule log was saved to light this year's, connecting one Christmas to the next in an unbroken chain stretching back through generations. Children might receive small gifts on this day, though gift-giving wasn't as central to medieval Christmas as it would later become. Perhaps a carved wooden toy, a new pair of mittens, a sweet cake shaped like a baby in a manger. Work is forbidden. Absolutely forbidden. The 12 days of Christmas are feast days, holy days, and to work during them would be both sacrilegious and unlucky. Mills fall silent. Hammers are set aside. Even necessary work like caring for animals is done with special prayers and thanksgiving. As night falls on this first day, families remain awake long into the darkness. Candles burn. Songs are sung. In the great halls, minstrels play. In humble homes, mothers sing lullabies to their children, the same lullabies sung for centuries, songs about the Christ child sleeping in his mother's arms. And this is only the first day. 11 more await us. Day 2, St. Stephen's Day, December 26th. The second day of Christmas belongs to Stephen, the first Christian martyr. And here we see something fascinating about the medieval mind. The ability to hold joy and sorrow, celebration and sacrifice, all at once. Yesterday was about the birth of Christ, pure joy and light. Today we remember that following Christ leads to suffering. Stephen, we're told in the book of Acts, was stoned to death for his faith. As the stone struck him, he prayed for his killers, echoing Christ's own words on the cross. The medieval church didn't shy away from this darkness. They understood that birth and death are intertwined, that every beginning carries within it an ending. So even in the midst of Christmas celebration, they paused to honor those who died for their beliefs. In England and parts of Northern Europe, St. Stephen's Day had its own particular traditions. Stephen is the patron saint of horses, you see, because, well, the connection is somewhat obscure, perhaps related to his name or to legends that grew up around him. But on this day, horses were specially blessed. Imagine the scene. Horses brought to the church door, their breath steaming in the cold air. The priest comes out in his vestments, carrying holy water. He blesses each animal, praying for their health and strength through the coming year. Horses were precious in the medieval world: transportation, farm work, warfare, status symbols. This blessing was both spiritual and deeply practical. After the blessing, in some regions, the horses were raced. Young men would mount up and race from the church to a designated point and back. The winner received a prize, often a quantity of ale or a small purse of coins. It was a way of testing the blessing, perhaps, of celebrating the animal's vitality. St. Stephen's Day was also, in many places, the beginning of Boxing Day traditions, though that term wouldn't be used until much later. On this day, alms boxes in churches were opened, and the contents distributed to the poor. Employers gave gifts to their servants. Landlords gave presents to their tenants. This was part of the medieval understanding of Christmas as a time of inversion, when normal social hierarchies were softened. The wealthy were expected to be generous. The powerful were expected to serve. It wasn't true equality. Medieval society was deeply stratified, but for these 12 days, the obligations between classes were emphasized. The Lord must care for his people. The rich must feed the poor. Leftover food from yesterday's feast was packed up and delivered to needy families. Coins were distributed. In some households, the lady of the manor herself would serve food to the poor, a symbolic reversal of her usual role. The feasting continues today. More meat, more bread, more spiced wine. Medieval Christmas wasn't a single meal but a continuous celebration. Kitchens barely cooled. Serving staff worked constantly, though they too were given special treats and extra rations during this season. Entertainment was crucial. In noble households, this might mean professional entertainers, jugglers, acrobats, musicians. In peasant homes, people made their own amusement. Dancing, though often frowned upon by strict clergy, was popular. Sword dances, Morris dancing, carol dancing, yes, carol originally meant a circle dance, with singing, not just the songs we think of now. Mumming began on St. Stephen's Day in some regions. Mummers were people, often young men, who disguised themselves, sometimes in elaborate costumes, sometimes simply with their faces blackened or wearing masks. They would go from house to house, performing short plays, often about St. George fighting the dragon, or about death and resurrection. In exchange, they received food, drink, and small gifts. There's something ancient and slightly wild about mumming. The disguises, the performances, the transgression of going into other people's homes, it echoed older, pre-Christian traditions, winter rituals about death and rebirth, darkness and light. The church was never entirely comfortable with mumming, but it persisted because it was beloved by the people. As darkness falls on the second day, as families gather once again around their fires, they've begun to settle into the rhythm of the season. Work is still forbidden. Celebration continues. But they've been reminded, through Stephen's martyrdom, that joy and suffering walk hand in hand. That faith costs something. That even in celebration, we remember sacrifice. Day 3, St. John the Evangelist's Day, December 27th. The third day. Another saint, another layer of meaning added to our celebration. Today belongs to John, the beloved disciple, the one who leaned on Christ's breast at the Last Supper, the author, as medieval people believed, of the Gospel, 3 epistles, and the Book of Revelation. John is associated with love. Divine love, spiritual love, the mystical union between Christ and his followers. If Stephen represented martyrdom through death, John represents martyrdom through life. He was the only apostle who wasn't killed for his faith, who lived to old age, who endured. There's a beautiful tradition associated with St. John's Day, the blessing of wine. According to legend, John once drank poisoned wine and survived through divine intervention. So on his feast day, wine was blessed in churches throughout medieval Europe. The priest would take a chalice of wine and say a special blessing over it. Sometimes he would dip a cross into it. This blessed wine was then distributed to the faithful. Some people drank it immediately. Others took bottles of it home, saving it for times of illness or trouble, believing it had healing properties. Love of St. John, the wine was called. It represented communion, fellowship, divine protection. Friends would share it, drinking to each other's health and salvation. I drink to you the love of St. John, they would say, passing the cup. This is another glimpse into the medieval mind, that seamless blend of physical and spiritual, material and mystical. The wine is just wine, fermented grapes. But it's also blessed, sacred, imbued with divine power through the words of the priest and the intercession of the saint. It can heal your body and nourish your soul simultaneously. The feasting continues today, but perhaps with a slightly different character. John's day is more contemplative than Stephen's. More mystical. In monasteries, monks meditate on the opening of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. These cosmic, mysterious verses seemed particularly appropriate for Christmastide, this season when heaven and earth meet. In some regions, particularly in Germany and Eastern Europe, St. John's Day was when children were blessed. Parents would bring their children to church, and the priest would lay hands on them, praying for their health and holiness in the coming year. It was a recognition that children are precious, that they need protection, that they carry the future. The entertainment continues at noble courts. Perhaps today a mystery play is performed, actors presenting the story of the Nativity or the visit of the Magi. These weren't simple children's pageants. They could be elaborate productions with multiple acts, special effects, by medieval standards, perhaps a star that moved on wires, or an angel that descended from the rafters, beautiful costumes. In homes, people are perhaps beginning to feel the pleasant fatigue of continuous celebration. 3 days of feasting, 3 nights of shortened sleep, 3 days of wine and rich food. But there's still so much ahead. 9 more days. The season is far from over. Ghost stories continue to be told around fires. Winter is deep now. The sun sets early, rises late. The darkness seems vast, and in that darkness, the old stories have power. Tales of Black Annis, the blue-faced hag who eats children. Stories of the wild hunt, ghostly hunters riding across the sky with their spectral hounds. These aren't just entertainment, they're reminders of the world's mystery, its danger, the thin line between the known and the unknown. But inside, by the fire, with family close and the Yule log burning, there's safety. There's light. There's the warmth of community and the comfort of tradition. The 3rd day ends as the others have, with prayer and song, with full bellies and grateful hearts. Day 4, the Feast of the Holy Innocents, December 28th. Now we come to the darkest day of Christmas. The 4th day commemorates the Holy Innocents, the baby boys of Bethlehem, murdered by King Herod in his attempt to kill the infant Jesus. Matthew's Gospel tells us that Herod, hearing of a newborn king, ordered all boys under 2 years old in Bethlehem to be killed. This is a sobering intrusion into our season of joy. The massacre of innocents. Mothers weeping for their children. Herod's cruelty. The randomness and horror of it. These children died in Christ's place, though they never knew him, never followed him. They were martyrs before they could even speak. Medieval people didn't shy away from this darkness. They understood that the Christmas story contains terror as well as wonder. The Holy Family became refugees, fleeing to Egypt to escape Herod's soldiers. Innocent children died. Joy and sorrow are inseparable. On this day, called Childermas, in medieval England, there were special observances. In many places, it was considered an unlucky day, a day when no new enterprises should be begun, when important business should be avoided. Some people wouldn't even make their beds on Childermas, fearing bad luck. The church bells rang in a muted way, if at all. The mood was solemn. Priests wore purple or black vestments instead of the white and gold of Christmas. During Mass, instead of joyful hymns, there were laments. The liturgy incorporated Jeremiah's prophecy. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled, because they are no more. And yet, even on this dark day, there were peculiar customs that seemed to contradict the solemnity. In some regions, Childermas was when the boy bishop tradition reached its height. The boy bishop custom was extraordinary. A young boy, often a choir boy, would be chosen to serve as bishop for a day or for the entire period from St. Nicholas's Day through the Holy Innocents. He would dress in miniature bishop's vestments, carry a crozier, wear a mitre. He would preside over services, deliver sermons, even collect offerings. This was that medieval sense of inversion again, of the world turned upside down during Christmas. The least became the greatest. A child took on adult authority. There's something both charming and slightly subversive about it. These young bishops often gave sermons that gently mocked adult authority and pomposity. In English schools and cathedrals, on Childermas, the boy bishop and his child attendants would process through the streets, blessing people, collecting alms. Adults were expected to defer to them, at least symbolically. It was a reminder that Christ himself said we must become like children to enter the kingdom of heaven. The feasting continues today, though perhaps more quietly. The Yule log still burns. Families still gather. But there's an awareness of fragility, of how quickly joy can turn to sorrow, of how the powerful can harm the innocent. In some households, parents would especially cherish their children on this day, holding them close, thanking God for their safety. In a world with high infant mortality, where death was a constant companion, the massacre of the innocents wasn't ancient history, it resonated with lived experience. Stories told on this night might be darker, more cautionary. Tales about the danger of pride, like Herod's. Stories about God's protection of the vulnerable. Legends of saints who protected children from harm. And yet, somehow, the celebration persists. Because that's what Christmas is, in the medieval understanding, not the denial of darkness, but the insistence of light despite darkness. Not the pretense that suffering doesn't exist, but the assertion that joy can coexist with suffering, that hope survives horror. The fourth day ends with prayers for all children, living and dead. Prayers for protection. Prayers for peace. And then sleep, exhausted sleep, with another day to come. Day 5, December 29th. The fifth day of Christmas doesn't have a major saint's feast assigned to it, at least not universally. In some places it was dedicated to St. Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, murdered in his cathedral in 1170. But the association varied by region and tradition. Without a single defining commemoration, the fifth day takes on a different character. It's a breathing space in the season. The intensity of the previous days. Christmas itself, 3 consecutive saints' days, including the dark Childermas, gives way to something more relaxed. This is when the rhythm of Christmas truly settles in. By the fifth day, people have adjusted to the pattern of continuous feasting and celebration. The initial excitement has mellowed into something more sustainable. There's still no work, still feasting and entertainment, but it's becoming comfortable, familiar. In great households, the festivities continue. The Lord of Misrule, appointed in some noble courts, is in full swing. This is another one of those marvelous inversions. A commoner, often a servant or a minor courtier, is appointed to preside over the Christmas revels. He organizes games, entertainment, feasting. He can make outrageous demands, and even the lord of the manor must obey, at least within reason and within the bounds of the season. The Lord of Misrule represents that ancient impulse toward disorder, toward the breaking of normal rules. He's descended from the Roman Saturnalia's mock king, from pagan winter festivals where the usual order was temporarily suspended. The Church tolerated him, barely, understanding that people needed this release, this moment of controlled chaos before returning to the rigid structures of everyday medieval life. Games are popular on this middle day of Christmas. Indoor games, since it's winter. Board games like tables, similar to backgammon, chess, dice games. Card games, though cards are a relatively recent innovation in medieval Europe, having arrived from the Islamic world in the 14th century. Physical games too. Blind man's buff, a favorite. Someone blindfolded, spun around, trying to catch others who tease and evade them. Hot cockles, where someone kneels with their head in another's lap and must guess who's hitting them. These games seem simple, even silly, but they serve a purpose. They create community, laughter, physical warmth on cold winter nights. Story riddles are posed. Someone tells a story with a puzzle embedded in it, and others must solve it. Or riddles themselves. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening? The ancient riddle of humanity, from infancy to old age. Medieval people loved wordplay, loved the twisting of language and meaning. The kitchens, after 5 days of continuous production, are beginning to show the strain. Servants are tired. Food stores are being depleted. But there's a kind of pride in it too. Look how much we've prepared, how generously we've celebrated. The more lavish the celebration, the more blessed the household, the more honored the Christ child. Specific dishes associated with this middle period of Christmas include elaborate pies. Not just meat pies, but surprise pies, where small live birds might be released when the pie is cut open, fluttering into the air. This is likely the origin of the nursery rhyme about 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie. Subtleties too, these were edible sculptures made from marzipan or pastry, shaped into castles, saints, nativity scenes. They were presented between courses at great feasts, carried in with ceremony, admired before being consumed. In village communities, there might be communal gatherings on this fifth day. Not everyone could afford private celebration throughout all 12 days, so the parish or village might organize shared feasts, games in the town square, group caroling. The wealthier members of the community were expected to contribute bread, ale, a pig for roasting. This communal aspect is crucial to understanding medieval Christmas. It wasn't primarily about individual families in separate homes, though that happened too. It was about community celebration, the whole village or manor or parish marking the season together. Shared joy, shared food, shared entertainment. The religious observance continues, of course. Daily Mass throughout the 12 days. The churches remain decorated with greenery. Candles burn. The liturgy continues its celebration of the Incarnation, that mystical doctrine that God became human, that the infinite compressed itself into finite flesh. As night falls on the fifth day, we're at the midpoint of Christmas. 6 days behind us, 6 ahead. The initial excitement has passed. The final culmination hasn't arrived yet. We're in the suspended middle, that strange temporal space where time seems to move differently, where the usual markers of days, work, routine, obligation, have disappeared. Medieval people understood something we've perhaps forgotten, that celebration is an art that requires endurance. That joy, sustained joy, is actually difficult. That feasting and festivity, maintained day after day, become a kind of spiritual discipline in themselves. And there's still more to come. Day 6, December 30th. The 6th day of Christmas. We're drifting now, floating in the middle of the season, untethered from the normal flow of time. No major feast today in most traditions. Just continuing celebration, continuing rest, continuing community. By the 6th day, something interesting happens in the human psyche. The novelty of the feast has worn off. The initial excitement has settled. But something deeper has taken root, a genuine sense of altered time, of living in a different rhythm. Medieval people, whose lives were governed by the seasons, by the liturgical calendar, by the rising and setting sun, were perhaps more attuned to this than we are. They understood how to sink into seasonal time, how to let celebration expand to fill the available space. The weather in late December is often harsh in Northern Europe. Snow, ice, biting winds. But inside, in halls and homes, the fire burns constantly. The Yule log, now 6 days in, has burned down considerably but should still provide flame. Adding wood to it is done with ceremony and thanksgiving. On these middle days, with no specific saint to commemorate, the focus shifts more fully to entertainment and storytelling. The professional minstrels at noble courts earn their keep now, performing epic tales that might last hours. They might perform romances, stories of Arthur and his knights, of Roland and Oliver, of Tristan and Isolde. These aren't just entertainment, they're moral instruction, models of behavior, explorations of honor, loyalty, love, sacrifice. A good minstrel could keep a hall entranced for an entire evening, his voice rising and falling, his lute or harp providing punctuation and mood. In less wealthy households, people tell their own stories. Family histories, passed down orally. Local legends about the founding of their village or the ghost that haunts the old mill. Everyone knew these stories, but the repetition was itself valuable. It bound the community together, created shared identity, transmitted values and memories across generations. Supernatural tales were especially popular during Christmastide. Stories about fairies, about helpful house spirits like brownies, about malevolent creatures that must be warded off with iron or rowan berries or Christian prayers. The line between Christian belief and older, pagan-rooted folklore was blurry in medieval folk culture. People went to Mass and also left milk out for the household sprite. They prayed to saints and also carried lucky charms. The Church officially disapproved of such superstitions, but it was a losing battle. Folk belief was deeply rooted, woven into the texture of daily life in ways the clergy couldn't fully control or understand. Food on the sixth day might be repetitive. More of what's been served before, but there are ways to vary it. Yesterday's roast becomes today's cold meats. Bones from earlier feasts make rich broths. Bread that's gone slightly stale becomes trenchers, edible plates that soak up meat juices and are then eaten themselves or given to the poor or to dogs. Medieval cuisine was more creative than we often give it credit for. They had access to a wide range of spices, at least in wealthy households. Pepper, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, cardamom, saffron. These were expensive, but Christmas was a time to use them generously. Everything was spiced, from the wine to the meat to the desserts. In the afternoon of the sixth day, perhaps there's hunting. The nobility loved to hunt, and a winter hunt had its own character, tracking deer or boar through snow, the crisp air, the thrill of the chase. Hunting was both sport and practical necessity, providing fresh meat for the ongoing feast. Peasants, forbidden to hunt the Lord's deer, might trap rabbits or birds. Poaching was common and harshly punished, but during Christmas, enforcement might be lax. A blind eye might be turned to a peasant who managed to snare a rabbit for his family's Christmas pot. As twilight falls, and it falls early in late December, people gather indoors again. More wine is mulled. More songs are sung. Children, full of food and excitement, grow sleepy. They're carried to bed while the adults continue their conversation and celebration into the night. The sixth day ends much as it began, unremarkable in specifics but remarkable in its sustained commitment to celebration, to joy, to community. Tomorrow will bring more of the same. And the day after. This is the lesson of the 12 days, that joy worth having is joy sustained, joy that endures, joy that becomes not an exception but a way of being, even if only temporarily. Day 7. December 31st, New Year's Eve. The 7th day of Christmas, and we've arrived at the threshold of the new year. December 31st, the last day of the old year, the eve of new beginnings. But here's something you need to understand: the medieval New Year was complicated. There wasn't a single, universal date for when the year changed. Different regions, different kingdoms, different record-keeping systems used different dates. In many places, the year officially began on March 25th, the feast of the Annunciation, when the angel appeared to Mary. This made theological sense. The year begins with the announcement of Christ's coming, the moment when God's plan for salvation begins to unfold. In other places, the year began at Christmas itself, December 25th. Or on Easter, a movable feast that changed dates each year. The modern January 1st New Year was observed in some places but wasn't universal in medieval Europe. So December 31st, our New Year's Eve, might or might not have been seen as the year's end by the medieval people experiencing it. But regardless of the official date, there was something psychologically significant about moving from December to January, from the old calendar month to the new. It was a threshold, a transition, even if not formally the new year. On this night, special attention was paid to beginnings and endings. To what was being left behind and what was approaching. There were divination customs, attempts to peer into the coming year and see what fate held. Young women might perform rituals to dream of their future husbands. Sleeping with a piece of wedding cake under their pillow, or reciting specific charms before bed, or looking into mirrors by candlelight at midnight. These practices were frowned upon by the church as quasi-magical, but they persisted because people wanted to feel some control over their futures, some glimpse of what was coming. Cakes and bread made on this day might be specially blessed or marked with Christian symbols, a cross scratched into the top of a loaf, prayers said over the dough. Food prepared at threshold times had special significance, was thought to carry protection and luck into the new period. The watch night service, where congregations stayed awake to pray from evening into the new year, had ancient roots. To watch, to stay vigilant, to mark the turning of time with prayer. This was considered spiritually important. Sleep during such a transition seemed almost irresponsible, a failure to acknowledge the significance of the moment. In some communities, as midnight approached, people would gather outside. When the church bell struck 12, they would shout, bang pots, make noise, driving away the old year, welcoming the new. It's a human impulse, this desire to mark time audibly, to make the invisible, time's passage, visible and audible through ritual and sound. The Yule log, after 7 days of burning, is burning low. In many traditions, it should burn throughout all 12 days, so on this evening, special care is taken to ensure it will last. More wood might be added, though with ceremony, with acknowledgement that this log bridges the year, connects old to new. Feasting continues on this seventh day, but perhaps with an edge of anticipation now. We're past the midpoint. The ending is in sight. The great feast of Epiphany approaches, when the wise men will arrive, when Christmas will reach its culmination and conclusion. Stories told tonight might be about endings and beginnings. About journeys completed and journeys begun. About cycles of time, seasons turning, the wheel of the year rolling forward inexorably. In the cold and dark of late December, with the old year dying and the new year preparing to be born, medieval people were acutely aware of time's passage, life's fragility, the need to celebrate while celebration is possible. They knew that joy is fleeting, that all feasts end, that work and obligation would return. But that knowledge didn't diminish their joy, it intensified it. This is what they understood, what we've perhaps forgotten. That all joy is temporary, and that's precisely what makes it precious. The 12 days will end. That's why each day matters. Each meal, each song, each shared moment around the fire is unrepeatable and therefore sacred. The seventh day ends with prayer and hope, with looking backward in gratitude and forward in anticipation. 7 days behind us. 5 ahead. The season rolls onward. Day 8, January 1st, the Feast of the Circumcision. The 8th day of Christmas, and we've crossed into January. A new month, a new year by some reckonings. And on this day, the Church commemorates the circumcision of Christ, 8 days after his birth, when he was circumcised according to Jewish law and formally named Jesus. This feast emphasizes Christ's humanity, his full participation in human life and Jewish religious practice. He wasn't just God appearing as human. He was fully human, undergoing human rituals, subject to human law, experiencing human physicality in all its dimensions. Medieval theologians meditated deeply on this. The circumcision was Christ's first shedding of blood, a foreshadowing of the crucifixion. Some mystics wrote of it as the first pain he suffered for humanity's sake. Even as an 8-day-old infant, the work of salvation had begun. There's something almost uncomfortable about this feast to modern sensibilities, but medieval people didn't shy away from it. They saw it as proof of the Incarnation's reality. God had truly become flesh, flesh that could be cut, that could bleed, that could feel pain. On this day, in addition to celebrating the circumcision, the Church emphasized the naming of Jesus. Names had immense power in medieval understanding. To name something was to have power over it, to define its nature and purpose. The name Jesus means God saves in Hebrew, and medieval preachers would elaborate on this meaning. This child was named for his mission, his very identity was salvation. January 1st was also, in many places, a day of gift-giving. Not the commercial exchange we know now, but something more feudal, more embedded in social relationships. Tenants might bring gifts to their lords, perhaps produce from their farms, a fine cheese, a cured ham. Lords, in return, were expected to give gifts back. Coins, fabric, sometimes a day's feast for all their tenants. These weren't optional exchanges. They were ritualized acknowledgments of the bonds between lord and vassal, master and servant, patron and client. The gift wasn't just an object, it was a symbol of relationship, of mutual obligation, of the ties that bound medieval society together. In royal courts, New Year's gifts could be elaborate. Kings and queens exchanged expensive presents with their nobles. Jeweled cups, fine horses, bolts of silk and velvet, illuminated manuscripts. An account book from the English court shows that Elizabeth of York, wife of Henry VII, received gifts including a tablet of gold garnished with rubies and a silver gilt pomander. In return, she gave gifts of similar value to those in her circle. The feast continues, of course. 8 days now. The tables have been continually replenished, though by now, the initial stores are depleted and later supplies are being brought forward. Dried fruits that were saved, figs, dates, raisins. Preserved quinces and plums. Spiced nuts. Every household had prepared for the 12 days, stocking up as much as their means allowed. Entertainment on this 8th day might include dancing. Real dancing now, not just the sedate carol dances but livelier forms. The estampi, a lively medieval dance with stamping steps. The saltarello, a jumping dance from Italy that was spreading across Europe. The basse danse, slower and more stately, performed by couples in long, gliding steps. In peasant communities, folk dances with ancient roots, circle dances around a bonfire, sword dances where men leaped and clashed blades in complex patterns that might have originated in pre-Christian warrior rituals. The church hierarchy was suspicious of such dances, seeing in them vestiges of paganism, but they persisted because they were beloved, because they connected people to their history and to each other. If there was snow, and there often was in northern Europe in early January, there might be snow games. Snowball fights, building snow figures, sledding down hills on wooden boards or animal hides. Children and adults alike participated. Christmas was a time when adults could be playful, when dignity could be temporarily set aside. The weather was harsh, make no mistake. January in medieval Europe, before modern heating, before insulated buildings, was brutally cold. People wore layers of wool, huddled near fires, slept in their clothes. Frostbite was common. The poor, in their drafty huts, truly suffered. This makes the Christmas fires, the hot food, the warm ale all the more precious. For 12 days, at least, there was warmth and plenty. Stories told on this 8th night might be about journeys. Because we're in the second half of Christmas now, moving toward Epiphany, and Epiphany is about the Magi's journey. So tales of travelers, of wise men seeking wisdom, of following stars, of long roads and distant destinations, would be appropriate. Perhaps the romance of the Three Kings of Cologne would be told. The legend that the Magi's bones were brought to Cologne Cathedral, where they rested in a golden shrine. Whether true or not, medieval people believed it, and pilgrims traveled to Cologne to venerate the relics of Caspar, Melchior, and Balthasar, the names tradition had given to the unnamed wise men of Matthew's Gospel. As night deepens on this 8th day, as the fire burns low and people prepare for sleep, there's a sense of the season's arc. We're descending now toward the ending. 5 more days. The story is approaching its conclusion. The Magi are drawing near to Bethlehem, following their star, bringing their gifts. Sleep comes easier now. Bodies are tired from 8 days of rich food and little exercise. Minds are quieter, settled into the rhythm of celebration. Tomorrow will bring another day of feast, another saint to remember, another step on this 12-day journey through midwinter's heart. Day 9, January 2nd. The 9th day of Christmas arrives without a major universal feast attached to it, though some regions commemorated various saints on this date. It's another of those breathing spaces in the season, a day that takes its character from what surrounds it rather than from its own specific observance. By the 9th day, there's a quality to the celebration that's hard to describe. A mellowness. The frantic energy of the early days has long since dissipated. The novelty has completely worn off. What remains is something deeper, a genuine inhabiting of festive time, a comfort with celebration as a mode of being rather than as an exception. Medieval people lived very close to the bone, most of them. Life was hard, food was often scarce, comfort was rare. These 12 days were an extraordinary suspension of normal hardship. To have enough to eat, to have warmth, to have leisure, to have community, this was a glimpse of paradise, of how life might be in the world to come. The theologians spoke of Christmas as a foretaste of heaven. And what is heaven, in medieval understanding? Not harps and clouds, necessarily, but fellowship, abundance, joy, the absence of suffering, the presence of God. The Christmas feast, at its best, offered a temporary earthly version of that heavenly reality. On this 9th day, with only 4 days remaining, people begin to think about the return to normal life. Work will resume after Epiphany. The fields still need tending, even in winter. Animals need care. Repairs that have been postponed need attention. Life will reassert its demands. But not yet. Not today. Today, still, there is feast and celebration. The kitchen staff, servants in wealthy households, wives and daughters in poorer ones, are showing the strain. 9 days of continuous cooking. The great kitchens of castles and manor houses were designed for this, with multiple hearths, roasting spits large enough for whole oxen, ovens that could bake dozens of loaves at once. But even so, the work was exhausting. In peasant homes, where the cooking was done at a single hearth, where one woman might be responsible for feeding an extended family, the burden was immense. And yet it was also a source of pride. To successfully feast for 12 days, to keep the table laden, to ensure no one went hungry, this was an accomplishment, a demonstration of skill and careful planning. The social aspects of Christmas are in full flower by the 9th day. New friendships have formed. Old quarrels have been set aside, at least temporarily. It was considered bad luck and bad manners to nurse grievances during Christmas. Romances have begun. Young people, thrown together during the celebrations, have noticed each other, exchanged glances, perhaps stolen kisses during the dancing. In some regions, January 2nd was a day for visiting. Not just within the village but to neighboring communities. Groups would travel together for safety and companionship, going to visit relatives or friends in other parishes. They would bring food gifts, share news, extend the celebration beyond their immediate community. This visiting served important social functions. It maintained ties between families separated by distance. It allowed young people to meet potential marriage partners from outside their immediate village, preventing too much intermarriage among small populations. It spread news and information in a world without mass communication. Travelers on the roads during Christmas season expected hospitality. It was both Christian duty and social expectation to welcome travelers, especially during these holy days. To turn someone away from your door during Christmas was considered shameful, possibly even dangerous. There were tales of angels or Christ himself appearing as travelers, testing people's charity. The stories told on this 9th evening might be winding down. The professional minstrels, if there are any, have exhausted much of their repertoire. The family stories have all been told, probably multiple times. But there's comfort in repetition. The young children, hearing these tales for the first time, are still enchanted. The elders, hearing them for the 100th time, smile at familiar moments, mouths forming along with the teller's words. Music continues. Simple songs, folk melodies that everyone knows. Rounds, where one voice starts and others join in at intervals, creating harmony. Lullabies, as exhausted children are rocked to sleep. Drinking songs, as the adults continue their merrymaking into the night. The Yule log, 9 days in, is substantially burned. Careful management has kept it going, but it's much reduced now. In some traditions, a piece of it would be saved and kept throughout the year, then used to light next year's log. This created a chain of fire stretching back through the years, each Christmas linked to the last. Pause. As sleep comes on this 9th night, there's perhaps a tinge of melancholy. Not sadness, exactly, but the awareness that all things pass, that joy is temporary, that the season is waning. 4 days remain. 4 precious days. The wise men are drawing ever closer to Bethlehem, their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh ready to present to the infant king. The rhythm of the season continues. Feast, prayer, entertainment, fellowship. The rhythm is so established now that it feels like it could continue forever. But it can't, and everyone knows it. Which makes these remaining days all the more valuable. Day 10, January 3rd. The 10th day of Christmas. We're in the final third of the season now. The end is in sight, and with it comes a subtle shift in energy. Not quite the desperate gaiety of trying to hold on to something slipping away, but an intensification, a deepening appreciation for what remains. January 3rd, like the ninth day, typically lacked a major universal feast, though various local saints might be commemorated depending on region and tradition. The day takes its meaning from its position in the arc of Christmas. We're close now to Epiphany, close to the visit of the Magi, close to the revelation of Christ to the Gentiles. In the liturgy, the readings and prayers begin to emphasize the Epiphany themes. Light coming to those in darkness. The recognition of Christ by those outside the Jewish community. The universality of salvation. The Church is preparing the faithful for what's to come, building anticipation for the great feast that will conclude the season. The weather, in early January, is often at its harshest. The brief lengthening of daylight that began after the winter solstice is barely noticeable. It's still dark when people wake, dark again soon after midday. The cold is bone deep. Without Christmas, without this season of light and warmth and celebration, January would be almost unbearable. This is why Christmas mattered so much, why 12 full days were needed. It was a bulwark against winter's darkness, a defiant assertion of life and joy in the face of cold and death. The feasting wasn't excess. It was necessity, spiritual necessity, a way of maintaining hope and community through the darkest part of the year. On this 10th day, in some households, preparations begin for Epiphany. If a great feast is planned for the 12th day, the most elaborate preparations must begin now. Special dishes that take days to prepare, enormous pies, elaborate subtleties, preserved fruits that need to be soaked and softened, spices that need to be ground and mixed. In churches, preparations for the Epiphany liturgy are underway. Vestments are cleaned and repaired. Special vessels are polished. If the church possesses relics, they're prepared for display. Everything must be perfect for the feast that celebrates Christ's revelation to the world. Children might be rehearsing if they're to participate in Epiphany pageants. The story of the Magi was perfect for dramatization. The journey following the star, the arrival at Herod's court, the warning in a dream, the presentation of gifts. Simple costumes could be made, crowns of painted wood or stiffened fabric, robes borrowed or adapted from adults' clothing. The entertainment continues, but there's perhaps more variety now as people seek novelty after 10 days. Tricks and illusions might be performed, simple sleight of hand, the medieval version of magic tricks. Someone who could juggle or do acrobatics might perform. These skills, rare and admired, would be shared freely during Christmas as a gift to the community. Betting games might happen in the evening, dice games, card games, wagering small amounts. The church disapproved of gambling, but during Christmas, enforcement was lax. As long as it didn't get out of hand, as long as no one lost more than they could afford, it was overlooked as part of the season's permitted excesses. More dancing, more singing. The same songs repeated night after night, but that repetition created a sense of timelessness, of ritual. These weren't just entertainments, they were the liturgy of the season, the way communities prayed and celebrated together. Food on the 10th day draws from the full range of what's been prepared. The variety accumulated over 10 days of feasting means there's a remarkable spread: cold meats, fresh bread, cheese, fruits both fresh, if available, and preserved, nuts, sweets, ale and wine. Even in modest households, the table would seem abundant by comparison to normal times. The very poor, those who couldn't afford to feast privately, depended on charity during these days. The obligation of the wealthy to feed the poor was taken seriously, at least in theory. Leftover food was distributed. Alms were given. It wasn't perfect. Medieval charity was often condescending, and it certainly didn't eliminate poverty. But during Christmas, there was at least an acknowledgement that abundance should be shared. As night falls on the 10th day, as families gather once more around their fires, there's a bittersweet quality to the gathering. 2 days remain. Just 2. And then the season will culminate in Epiphany, and then normal life resumes. The magic will dissipate. The ordinary will return. But that's for later. Tonight, there's still warmth, still fellowship, still the glow of candlelight and firelight, still songs and stories and the comfort of community. Tonight, Christmas still reigns. The wise men are very close now, perhaps camping just outside Bethlehem, preparing for their audience with the newborn king. Stories told tonight might be about arrivals, about journeys completed, about the moment of recognition when something sought is finally found. The energy is building toward Epiphany, toward revelation, toward the culmination of everything the season has been building toward. Sleep on the 10th night is perhaps tinged with the knowledge that time is short. But sleep comes anyway, as it always does, carrying people toward whatever tomorrow will bring. Day 11, January 4th. The 11th day of Christmas. The penultimate day. Tomorrow is Epiphany Eve, and then the season will reach its crescendo and conclusion. Today is a threshold, a pause before the final celebration. 11 days. Think about that. 11 consecutive days of feasting, of celebration, of religious observance, of community gathering. By historical standards, by the standards of societies that lived close to subsistence, this was an extraordinary commitment of resources and time. It says something profound about what mattered to medieval people, about what they valued enough to invest their scarce resources in. They could have celebrated for just 1 day, or 3 days. They could have made Christmas a brief exception and then returned quickly to work. But they didn't. They claimed 12 full days, insisted on them, structured their year around them. Why? Because they understood something about human need that goes beyond material survival. They understood that we need celebration, need beauty, need joy, need transcendence. They understood that a life without feast is a life diminished, that communities are forged not just through work but through shared celebration, that the sacred requires time and attention and lavish devotion. The 11th day embodies this commitment. Most of the important observances are past: Christmas itself, the saints' days, New Year's. Epiphany is still ahead. This day in between could be skipped, could be treated as ordinary. But it isn't. The feast continues. The celebration persists. In wealthy households, final preparations for tomorrow's Epiphany feast are intense. The kitchen is controlled chaos, multiple dishes being prepared simultaneously, servants rushing between hearth and table, the cook shouting instructions, the heat and smell almost overwhelming. The Epiphany feast was traditionally the most elaborate of the season. It was the finale, the culmination, and it needed to exceed everything that had come before. If a household had been holding anything back, saving their finest ingredients, planning their most impressive dishes, this was when they deployed them. The 12th night cake was being prepared, a rich fruit cake that would be the centerpiece of tomorrow's celebration. Baked into it was a bean, and whoever received the slice containing the bean would be crowned the Bean King or Bean Queen, presiding over the evening's festivities. This was another instance of that medieval love of inversion. Chance, not rank, determining who would rule the feast. In churches, clergy were preparing for the Epiphany liturgy. This was one of the great feasts of the church year, celebrating the manifestation of Christ to the Gentiles. The gospel reading would be about the Magi, those mysterious figures from the east, following a star, bringing gifts, recognizing the infant Jesus as king. Medieval people were fascinated by the Magi. Who were they? Where exactly did they come from? How did they know to follow the star? Artists painted them, writers embellished their story, preachers speculated about them. By the medieval period, tradition had settled on three, representing the three races of humanity descended from Noah's sons, representing three ages of life, youth, maturity, old age, representing the three parts of the known world, Europe, Asia, Africa. Their gifts were laden with symbolism that medieval theologians elaborated endlessly. Gold for kingship. Frankincense for divinity. Myrrh for death and suffering. Even at Christ's birth, his crucifixion was foreshadowed. Every element of the story was mined for meaning, for spiritual significance. On this 11th day, there might be a final burst of visiting, of settling social obligations before the season ends. Gifts that should have been given are given now. Thank yous are expressed. Relationships are affirmed or mended. There's a sense of tying up loose ends, of completing the social work of Christmas before normal life resumes. The weather rarely cooperates. January in Northern Europe is harsh. But people venture out anyway, bundled in their warmest clothes, picking their way through snow or mud or ice, visiting neighbors, attending church, participating in communal gatherings. The cold is an adversary, but it's an adversary that can be overcome through determination and the warmth of human fellowship. Stories told on this 11th night are the final stories of the season. Tomorrow there will be the Epiphany celebration, but that's ceremonial, structured. Tonight is the last informal evening of Christmas, the last night of sitting around the fire in that special temporal space where normal rules don't apply. The stories might be about completion, about circles closing, about returns. Odysseus finally reaching home after his long wandering. The prodigal son returning to his father. Pilgrims reaching Jerusalem. Any tale of journey's end, of goal achieved, of long-sought thing finally attained. There's nostalgia already, even though the season hasn't quite ended. People are remembering moments from earlier in the 12 days, the excellent meal on St. Stephen's Day, the games on the 5th night, the funny thing someone said, the child's first taste of wassail. Memories are being formed, solidified, stored away to be recalled in the long months ahead when Christmas is just a memory. The Yule log, 11 days in, is nearly consumed. It's been carefully tended, fed with just enough wood to keep it burning without adding so much that it becomes a new fire rather than the continuation of the original. Tomorrow, on Epiphany, what remains of it will burn out or be ceremonially extinguished, and a piece will be saved for next year. As people prepare for sleep on this 11th night, there's anticipation. Tomorrow is Epiphany. Tomorrow the Magi arrive. Tomorrow the season reaches its appointed end. But there's also contentment. They've done it. 11 days of celebration. One more to go. The house is quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the breathing of sleepers. Outside, the winter night is deep and cold. But inside, there's warmth. There's peace. There's the satisfaction of a season well celebrated. Day 12. Epiphany Eve, January 5th. The 12th day of Christmas. Epiphany Eve. 12th night. The culmination of the entire season. This day has a different energy from all the others. There's excitement, certainly, but also melancholy. This is the last day. Tomorrow, Epiphany itself, is the ending, and the day after that, normal life returns. Work resumes. The feast is over. The special time concludes. Medieval people felt this keenly. The 12th day was celebrated with particular intensity precisely because it was the last. Everything that had been held back, saved for the perfect moment, was brought out now. This was the time to be most lavish, most joyful, most extravagant. The great 12th night feast would happen this evening. All day, preparations continued. In noble households, the entire staff was mobilized. The hall was decorated even more elaborately than it had been. Fresh greenery was brought in. Extra candles were lit. Musicians were given their final instructions. Everything had to be perfect. The 12th night cake was the centerpiece. This large, rich cake, made with dried fruits, spices, eggs, butter, flour, had been prepared yesterday and now was ready to serve. Remember, baked inside it was the bean. The person who received the slice with the bean would be crowned the Lord or Lady of Misrule for the evening, presiding over the festivities with mock authority. This might seem like just a game, but it carried deeper meaning. It was one final instance of the world turned upside down, one final assertion that during Christmas, normal hierarchies were suspended. The youngest, the lowest, the most unlikely person might become king for a night. It was democracy by chance, and it reminded everyone that earthly power and rank are temporary, contingent, ultimately subject to forces beyond human control. In churches, the Epiphany liturgy was being rehearsed. Tomorrow's service would be elaborate, with processions, special music, perhaps dramatic presentations of the Magi's visit. The church building was cleaned and decorated. The best vestments were laid out. Incense was prepared. Everything ready for the feast that celebrated Christ's manifestation to the world. Epiphany, you see, was about revelation. The word means manifestation or showing forth. Christ was revealed to the Magi, to the Gentiles, to the whole world. What had been hidden was made known. The light that came at Christmas was now shining beyond its initial small circle, reaching out to encompass all humanity. This was profoundly important to medieval Christians. It meant that salvation wasn't limited to Jews, wasn't limited to any particular group. The Christ child lying in that manger was for everyone, every nation, every language, every person. The Magi, coming from the east, represented all of us, all the non-Jews of the world, received into God's plan of salvation. The 12th night feast began as darkness fell. In a great hall, imagine the scene. The Lord and Lady presiding, their household and guests assembled, the tables laden with food, candles and torches providing flickering light, musicians in the gallery playing. The meal begins with ceremony. Perhaps a boar's head is brought in, or a swan, or some other impressive centerpiece. Attendants carry it high, and everyone applauds or cheers. It's theater as much as meal, spectacle as much as sustenance. Course follows course. Soups and stews. Roasted meats of every kind. Beef, pork, lamb, venison, game birds. Fish dishes, required because technically this is still a fast day by church law, though the fasting regulations were usually relaxed during Christmas. Pies and pastries. Vegetables cooked in rich sauces. Jellies molded into fantastic shapes. Subtleties, those edible sculptures, presented between courses. The ale and wine flow freely. By the 12th day, people are practiced drinkers, their tolerance built up over nearly 2 weeks of continuous celebration. But this night, perhaps, they drink even more freely, knowing it's the last opportunity. Then comes the moment everyone's been anticipating. The 12th night cake is brought out. It's cut and served. Who will get the bean? Everyone watches their slice carefully. And then, there. Someone bites down on something hard. The bean. They've found it. Whoever it is, perhaps a servant, perhaps a young man or woman, perhaps a child, is brought forward. A crown is placed on their head, perhaps just a crown of greenery and ribbons, perhaps something more elaborate. They're given a scepter, perhaps a wooden spoon decorated to look grand. And now they reign. For the rest of the evening, they give commands, and everyone must obey, within reason. They can demand songs, dances, games, toasts. They can knight people with silly titles. They can decree absurd laws. It's chaos, but joyful chaos. Controlled inversion. The world upside down, but safely, temporarily, in a context where everyone understands the rules and knows that tomorrow normalcy will return. The entertainment on Twelfth Night was the most elaborate of the season. Professional performers, if the household could afford them, pulled out all their best material. Jugglers, acrobats, trained animals, bears that danced, dogs that did tricks. Plays were performed, often religious dramas about the Nativity or the Magi, but also secular comedies, bawdy farces that made people roar with laughter. Dancing continued late into the night. The livelier dances, the ones that left people breathless and sweating. Young people especially danced, enjoying this last night of freedom before work resumed. Romances that had been kindled earlier in the season reached their culmination tonight. Stolen moments in darkened corners, whispered promises, perhaps agreements reached between families about betrothals. The music was loud, joyful, sometimes cacophonous. Everyone with any musical ability was encouraged to perform. Drums, pipes, fiddles, lutes, voices raised in song. The noise itself was celebratory, an assertion of life and joy against the silent darkness outside. In village celebrations, where there were no professional entertainers, people made their own amusement. Silly games were played. Someone might tell a long, rambling story that makes no sense, seeing how long they can keep people listening before everyone realizes it's nonsense. Riddles were posed, with forfeits for those who couldn't answer. Sing a song, do a silly dance, drink a cup of ale in one draught. The mood was bittersweet. This was the peak of joy, but also the end of joy. Tomorrow, Epiphany, would be more solemn, more religious in character. And the day after that, back to work. Back to normal. Back to the cold reality of January in medieval Europe. But tonight, for these few precious hours, Christmas still reigned. The season wasn't quite over. There was still time to celebrate, to revel, to be joyful. As midnight approached, as the 12th day gave way to Epiphany, there might be a final toast. The Lord or Lady of Misrule, crowned with their silly crown, would raise a cup. To Christmas, they might say. To the 12 days. To this company. To joy. Everyone would raise their cups. To Christmas, they would chorus. To joy. And then they would drink deeply, and the celebration would continue until people began to drop from exhaustion, until the candles burned low, until even the most energetic revelers had to admit defeat and seek their beds. The 12th day ends in the early hours of January 6th. The Yule log has burned to ash. The decorations are looking slightly bedraggled after 12 days. The food is running low. Everyone is tired, overfed, perhaps a bit drunk. But they've done it. 12 full days of Christmas. They've celebrated the Incarnation, honored the saints, fed the poor, enjoyed fellowship, told stories, sung songs, danced, feasted, prayed. They've created a season outside normal time, a space where joy was the rule and community was celebrated and the divine felt close. As sleep finally comes, as the house falls quiet, as the fires burn down to coals, there's satisfaction. And tomorrow, Epiphany itself will bring one final moment of celebration before Christmas concludes. Epiphany, January 6th, the 13th day. And so we arrive at Epiphany. The 13th day, if we're counting inclusively, though traditionally it's considered the conclusion of the 12 days rather than a separate day. January 6th. The Feast of the Epiphany. The manifestation of Christ to the Gentiles. The arrival of the Magi. People wake on Epiphany morning tired but with a sense of purpose. This is a major feast of the Church, and attendance at Mass is expected. This isn't a day for sleeping late, for letting the exhaustion of 12 days of celebration keep you in bed. This is the culminating day of the season, and it must be marked properly. The Church is at its most glorious for Epiphany. If it was beautiful at Christmas, it's even more so now. The decorations are refreshed. The candles seem to burn brighter. The vestments are the finest the Church possesses, cloth of gold, if they have it, embroidered with images of the Magi following their star. The Mass begins with a procession. In cathedrals and larger churches, this could be elaborate, clergy processing in order of rank, servers carrying candles and incense, the Gospel book held high, perhaps even 3 people dressed as the Magi, wearing crowns and carrying vessels representing gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The Gospel reading is from Matthew. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and have come to worship him. The preacher on Epiphany had rich material to work with. He might speak about the star. What was it? A natural phenomenon? A miracle? How did the Magi know to follow it? He might speak about the Magi themselves. Who were they? Kings? Priests? Astrologers? Why did they come? What prompted them to undertake this long, dangerous journey? But most importantly, he would speak about what Epiphany means. That Christ came not just for Jews but for all people. That the kingdom of God is universal, open to everyone who seeks it. The Magi, Gentiles from a distant land, represent all of us non-Jews. Their acceptance, their recognition of Christ as King, their worship of Him, this is our story. We are the Magi. In some churches, a dramatic presentation of the Magi's visit was performed during the Massachusetts actors, usually clergy or choir boys, would process through the church as if traveling from the east. They would stop at the altar, representing Herod's palace, and ask about the newborn king. Then they would continue, following a star, perhaps a lantern on a string, moved along the ceiling. Finally, they would arrive at the nativity scene. Most churches had one, a manger with figures of Mary, Joseph, and the infant Jesus. The actor magi would kneel. They would present their gifts, actually handing symbolic vessels to the priest. They would then sleep, lying down briefly to represent the dream in which an angel warned them not to return to Herod. Then they would process out by a different route, returning to their country by another way, as the Gospel says. This drama made the story immediate, real, visible. People didn't just hear about the Magi, they saw them, watched their journey, witnessed their worship. It was participatory theology, faith enacted and embodied. After Mass, there was one final feast. Not as elaborate as last night's 12th night celebration, but still special. The household gathered. The food that remained was served. Perhaps there was still some 12th night cake left. Perhaps there were special Epiphany dishes. In some regions, a special bread was baked, marked with a cross or with the initials of the Magi, C+M+B, for Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar. This bread might be blessed by the priest. Pieces of it might be saved and kept in the house for protection throughout the year. Medieval people loved blessed objects, water, salt, herbs, bread, candles, believing they carried spiritual power, offered protection against evil, brought good fortune. In some places, Epiphany was when houses were blessed. The priest would go from house to house, bringing holy water and chalk. He would bless the dwelling and its inhabitants, praying for their health and prosperity. Then, with the blessed chalk, he would write above the door, 20 plus C plus M plus B plus 25, or whatever the current year was. The letters represented both the Magi's names and the Latin phrase, Christus mansionem benedicat, Christ bless this house. This inscription was left up all year, a visible sign of the home's blessing, a ward against evil, a reminder of Epiphany and the Magi's worship. It connected the everyday domestic space to the sacred story, made the home itself a part of the ongoing narrative of salvation. Children, especially, loved Epiphany. It was the day when, in some traditions, they received gifts, not from parents but from the Magi. The tradition varied. In some places, children left their shoes out, and the Magi filled them with small presents. In others, gifts were given at the Epiphany feast. Sweets, small toys, perhaps an orange, that exotic fruit from the south that was such a luxury in northern Europe that a single orange was a precious gift. The gift-giving echoed the Magi's gifts to Christ. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, precious items, the best they had to offer, given freely to honor the newborn king. The lesson was clear. We too should give our best, should offer what we have to God and to each other. Generosity, the medieval church taught, was a virtue that imitated divine generosity. God gave us Christ, we give to each other in thanksgiving and love. As the afternoon of Epiphany wore on, there was a palpable sense of ending. The decorations, the holly, the ivy, the evergreen boughs that had adorned halls and churches, were taken down. It was considered unlucky to leave them up past Epiphany. Some were carefully saved to be burned later, preferably on Candlemas in early February, creating another connection between feast days. Others were simply composted or fed to animals. The Yule log, or what remained of it, was ceremonially extinguished if it was still burning. A piece was saved, wrapped carefully, stored somewhere dry and safe. Next Christmas, this piece would be brought out to light the new Yule log, creating that chain of fire linking one Christmas to the next, connecting the years in an unbroken line. The mood on Epiphany evening was different from any other night of the season. There was no wild celebration, no dancing and games. Instead, there was quiet reflection, perhaps some sadness. The season was ending. Tomorrow, work would resume. The magical time was concluding. Families gathered around their fires one last time in this special configuration. The songs sung were quieter, more contemplative. Perhaps they sang the Magnificat, Mary's song, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior." Perhaps they sang hymns about the Magi, about their journey, about their recognition of the divine in unexpected places. Stories told on Epiphany evening were different too. Not entertainment stories, but meaningful ones. Stories about recognition, about seeing truly, about wisdom. The Magi were wise men, after all. They recognized what others missed. They saw divinity in a baby born to poor parents in an obscure village. They understood that power and glory can wear unexpected faces. This was the final lesson of the Christmas season: look carefully, because the sacred might be hiding in plain sight. The eternal might be wrapped in the temporary. God might appear as a helpless infant. The King of Kings might be found in a stable, surrounded by animals and common shepherds. Medieval Christians took this seriously. It meant that any person you met might be Christ in disguise. Any beggar at your door might be an angel. Any moment might be holy. Epiphany was about seeing truly, about recognizing the divine presence in the world. As bedtime approached on this final night, parents tucked their children in with extra care. The children, who had enjoyed 12 days of treats and excitement and relaxed rules, were reminded that tomorrow normal life would return. They would have chores again. Lessons would resume. Discipline would be enforced. But the children also carried with them the memories of these 12 days. The tastes of special foods. The warmth of crowded rooms full of family and friends. The stories and songs. The sense that life could be different, could be joyful, could be abundant. These memories would sustain them through the long winter ahead, through the work and hardship and cold. Adults too carried these memories. For 12 days, they had glimpsed something different, a life with enough to eat, with leisure, with community, with beauty and celebration and transcendence. It wasn't that their normal lives lacked meaning or value. But these 12 days reminded them what life could be, what it should be, what perhaps it would be in the world to come. Sleep on Epiphany night came with mixed emotions. Gratitude for the season just passed. Sadness that it was ending. trepidation about returning to normal routines. But also hope that the joy experienced during Christmas could somehow be carried forward, could somehow infuse ordinary life with extra meaning. The medieval understanding was that Christmas didn't just commemorate a past event, Christ's birth 2,000 years ago. It also celebrated a present reality. Christ is born again in our hearts each year. And it anticipated a future hope, Christ will come again, and when he does, every day will be Christmas, every moment will be feast, every person will dwell in the light and joy and abundance that the 12 days had offered a glimpse of. Outside, the winter night was cold and dark. January stretched ahead, with February and March to follow, long months of scarcity and hardship before spring would arrive. But inside, hearts were warm with memory and hope. Christmas had happened. The 12 days had been celebrated. The Incarnation had been honored. The season had done its work. And in 11 months, it would all happen again. Closing, the meaning of the 12 days. And so, dear listeners, we've walked together through the 12 days of Christmas as medieval people experienced them. From Christmas morning, with its triumphant masses and beginning of feasting, through the parade of saints' days, the darkness of Childermas, the threshold of the new year, the final celebration of Twelfth Night, to the culminating revelation of Epiphany. What can we learn from this journey? What do these medieval celebrations have to teach us, here in our modern world? First, I think, there's the sheer commitment to celebration. 12 full days. Not just acknowledging a holiday and moving on, but truly dwelling in festive time, allowing celebration to become a way of being rather than a brief interruption of normalcy. Medieval people understood that joy requires time, that community is forged through sustained shared experience, that the sacred needs space to unfold. We live in a world that moves so quickly. We compress our celebrations into single days, into hours even. We rush from one obligation to the next. But what if we gave ourselves permission to slow down, to truly inhabit special seasons, to let celebration expand and deepen? Second, there's the integration of joy and sorrow, light and darkness. Medieval Christmas didn't pretend suffering doesn't exist. Saint Stephen's martyrdom, the massacre of the holy innocents, these dark realities were acknowledged even in the midst of celebration. But acknowledging darkness didn't diminish joy. Instead, it made joy more profound, more meaningful, more necessary. We often feel we must choose, either embrace joy and ignore suffering, or acknowledge suffering and abandon joy. But the medieval Christmas says we can hold both, that we must hold both. Life contains both. An authentic celebration doesn't deny sorrow but transcends it without erasing it. Third, there's the emphasis on community and inversion. Christmas was when normal social hierarchies were softened, when the wealthy served the poor, when children could be bishops, when a servant might be crowned king of the feast. This wasn't revolution. Medieval society remained deeply stratified. But it was a reminder that all human structures are provisional, that before God all are equal, that mercy and generosity should characterize our relationships. What would it mean for us to build regular moments of inversion into our lives? Times when those usually served get to lead? When those usually ignored get to speak? When power is playfully redistributed as a reminder that it's not absolute or permanent? Fourth, there's the seamless blending of material and spiritual. The Yule log wasn't just firewood, it was a symbol of light persisting through darkness. The feast wasn't just food, it was communion, thanksgiving, celebration of God's provision. The entertainment wasn't just distraction. It was a way of embodying joy, of making happiness visible and audible and shared. We tend to separate these realms. Material is material, spiritual is spiritual. But medieval people knew better. Everything is potentially sacred. Every meal can be Eucharist. Every gathering can be worship. Every moment can be prayer. Christmas demonstrated this integration at its fullest. Fifth, there's the storytelling. So many stories told around so many fires during those 12 days. Stories of saints and heroes, of ghosts and miracles, of family and community history. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were the way meaning was transmitted, values were taught, identity was formed. They connected past, present, and future, binding generations together. We're losing this, I think. We have stories, so many stories, more than ever, but do we have storytelling? Do we have the gathered community, the attentive listening, the oral transmission of what matters? The 12 days remind us that storytelling is a sacred act, a way of making and maintaining community. Sixth, and perhaps most importantly, there's the conviction that celebration matters. That feasting and festivity aren't frivolous but essential. That joy is not indulgence but necessity. That beauty and abundance and delight are not luxuries but requirements for fully human life. Medieval people, for all their hardships, and they had many, understood this. They poured resources into celebration that we might think should have been used for practical purposes. They spent time on beauty that we might think was wasted. But they knew something we've forgotten, that humans don't live by bread alone, that we need transcendence and wonder and joy, that efficiency isn't the highest value. The 12 days of Christmas were many things: religious observance, social ritual, economic exchange, entertainment, community formation. But at their heart, they were an assertion of human dignity and divine grace. They said, "We matter enough to celebrate. Life is meaningful enough to feast over. The everyday is shot through with sacred significance. And the God who created us loves us enough to become one of us, to enter into our life with all its beauty and sorrow, to share our existence and redeem it from within." As we conclude our journey through these medieval Christmases, I want to invite you to imagine. Imagine what it would be like to celebrate Christmas, or any season, for 12 full days. Imagine setting aside work, embracing festivity, gathering your community, telling your stories, sharing your abundance, making space for joy. You probably can't do exactly what medieval people did. Your life is different, your context is different, your constraints and possibilities are different. But you can take the spirit of it. The commitment to celebration, the integration of material and spiritual, the emphasis on community, the willingness to let festivity expand and deepen, the conviction that joy matters. What if next Christmas, or the next meaningful celebration in your life, you didn't rush through it? What if you let it unfold slowly, gave it time, invited people into it, made it beautiful, told the stories that matter, shared generously, laughed loudly, sang badly, danced awkwardly, feasted gratefully, and let yourself fully inhabit that festive time without guilt or hurry? What if you gave yourself 12 days? Or even just 3? Or even just one full, unhurried, fully embraced day? The medieval 12 days of Christmas aren't just history. They're an invitation, a possibility, a reminder of how celebration can be done, of what it looks like to truly honor the sacred seasons of our lives. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Thank you for slowing down, for imagining, for traveling back through time with me to visit these medieval Christmases. I hope you found something valuable in these stories, something you can carry forward into your own celebrations and your own life. May your days be merry and bright. May your celebrations be deep and true. May you find joy that encompasses sorrow, community that embraces strangers, and festivity that honors both the earthly and the divine. Until we meet again, dear listeners, may you walk in light and dwell in peace. This has been our journey through the 12 days of medieval Christmas. Thank you for listening. And may you find your own 12 days, whenever and however they come.